tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Welcome to Dharma for Kids. I'm going to tell you a story about a lion and a tiger, a story that the Buddha told over 2,000 years ago. And then afterward, I'll talk a little bit about what we can learn from the story. So let's get ready to hear the story by relaxing our body and relaxing our mind, and take some deep breaths so that we can pay attention better. So first, put your right hand in your left palm like this, and let's breathe in as we sit up tall, and breathe out, letting our arms and hands feel heavy, reaching our head toward the ceiling as we breathe in, letting our arms feel heavy as we breathe out. Notice air going in the nose as you breathe in. Notice the air going out the nose as you breathe out. Air going gently in the nose, air going gently out the nose. Air going in and air going out. Okay, before we start the story, I want to ask you a question. Can you remember the last time that you had a disagreement or an argument with someone, maybe with a brother or sister or with someone at school? Okay, so here's our story. This is called The Argument About the Moon. There was once a young tiger and a young lion who had grown up near each other and were friends ever since they were babies. Even when they grew up, they didn't know that lions and tigers are natural enemies. They were close friends. But one night they got into an argument. This is how it happened. They were walking around in the forest late at night. They were looking up at the sky full of bright stars. The tiger felt the air getting colder, and he looked up at the moon. It was a half moon, so they could see only half of the moon shining, like half of a pie shining way up in the sky. The tiger said, "The weather is getting colder." "So the moon must be getting smaller each day. In a few days we won't see it anymore." The lion looked at him with a puzzled expression and said, "Colder weather means the moon is getting bigger. In a few days it will be a full moon." The tiger said, "Everyone knows that it gets colder when the moon is getting smaller, from a full moon to a thin crescent moon." The lion said impatiently, "Where did you hear that? Everyone knows it gets colder when the moon is getting bigger." The tiger argued, "Now the moon is getting smaller, and it was colder today than it was yesterday." The lion looked annoyed and said, "You're just cold because you couldn't find anything to eat today." The tiger didn't like that comment, so he said with a loud roaring voice, opening his mouth to show his teeth, "It's none of your business what I eat. I'm not going to eat trash food like what you eat." The lion felt insulted, and with an angry look, opening his mouth even more, he roared, "I don't eat trash food!" The tiger walked away with an arrogant look and stayed a little distance away. Soon the sun began to rise. The lion stood proudly in the morning sun and shook his great mane, which made him look bigger. He said loudly to the tiger, "See, it's warmer today." The tiger felt annoyed and wanted to prove that he was right. He asked in a louder voice, "Don't you remember how cold it was yesterday?" The lion said slowly, clearly, and strongly, as if no one could disagree, "It was not cold." The tiger insisted with an insulting tone, "Yes, it was. You just don't remember." The lion, showing all his teeth, snapped back, "I have a good memory, and I know it is warmer than it was last week." The tiger, curling back his lips and showing all his teeth, roared, "You do not have a good memory. You forget things all the time." The lion roared back at him, sneering, "I do not, but you are not really the intelligent one here." The lion and the tiger started feeling more and more angry because they had each insulted the other. They were afraid they would lose their friendship forever. They remembered that there was a wise monk who lived nearby, and they decided to visit him to seek his advice. When they found the monk, they bowed to him, and the tiger said, "We had a disagreement about what causes the weather to become colder. When does the weather get colder? When the moon is getting bigger or when it's getting smaller?" The monk replied, "It can be colder in any phase of the moon, when it is getting bigger or getting smaller. It's not the moon, but the wind which brings colder weather. So you're both right. Neither of you loses the argument. The most important thing is to live without fighting and angry arguments. It is more important to live in peace and harmony than to win an argument." The tiger and the lion each realized how silly it was to get angry just because they wanted to prove they were right. They thanked the monk for his good advice, and the lion and tiger were happy to be friends again. And that's the end of our story. Okay, I want to ask you some questions to make sure you remember. How did the tiger and the lion first get into an argument? It was when they had a disagreement about whether the moon was getting bigger or smaller when the weather got colder, right? And what were they talking about when they first started getting angry and roaring? Do you remember? They were talking about food, eating, the trash food, remember? And when the tiger said that the lion didn't have a good memory, how do you think the lion felt? He felt insulted. His feelings were hurt. And how did they show their power and their anger? They opened their mouths and they showed their teeth and they spoke loudly and they roared. They insulted each other. They said bad things about each other. And what were they worried about that made them want to go visit the monk? They were worried about losing their friendship, remember? So now let's hear some words that the Buddha said. The Buddha said, "If, like a broken gong, you silence yourself, you are approaching nirvana because you no longer have angry speech." The Buddha mentioned a gong. That is a gong and the sounds it can make. So if it's totally broken, it can't make a sound. What is nirvana? The simple meaning of nirvana is its ultimate total happiness. So even if we feel angry and want to argue and prove I am right, so if we can instead learn to silence ourselves, to keep quiet and stop arguing, we can become much happier. So arguing means speaking in disagreement with each other. Is arguing a bad thing? Is it always a bad thing? No, some arguments are considerate and polite, with each person speaking in turn and listening carefully to the other person when they're speaking and trying to understand the other's point of view and explaining nicely. Those are good arguments and those are fine. But other arguments are unpleasant. We might call those quarreling or bickering or fussing. And what makes them unpleasant? When we have a loud voice, when there's shouting and insults and accusations, unkind words, hurt feelings, or when someone tries to force their idea on someone else, or when a person responds with revenge or unkind words in return. And why would we argue like that? Because we think we're right and the other person is wrong. And that may be true sometimes, but is it really true all the time? No, we're not always right. Even when we really are right, we don't always have to prove it. Sometimes we argue about things when there's no right answer, just like the tiger and the lion in the story. So we often argue when it's not necessary. We all like to be right, and when someone's wrong, we all like to show them what's right. And we tend to argue more, though, when we're irritated by something, or when we're worried or tired or just not feeling our best, or when we're feeling insecure or not confident. And at those times, when someone says something we don't agree with, we might just blurt out something without thinking first. So what happens to our face when we're having an unpleasant argument? it becomes tense, frowning, unhappy, and we move our eyebrows up or down. We raise our lips up and open our mouths more. For example, when we say, uh-huh, yes it is. And it shows our teeth more, just like the lion and the tiger in the story. And our voice gets louder or more forceful or higher with anger or frustration. Our heart beats faster and we breathe a bit harder, and some of our muscles even become tense. And after we argue, we may feel upset or angry for some time. We also might make the person we're arguing with upset or angry. And both of us may think about the argument later on with anger or with plans to prove that we're right and he's wrong. We waste a lot of time with those unpleasant thoughts. And what about the others who hear our argument? They get annoyed also. And even if you think you won an argument, does it really make you happy? Maybe so, but the happiness doesn't last long. And feeling upset from an argument can last a long time, especially if you insult each other. Another problem is if we argue often, then other people will think we're arrogant, maybe like a know-it-all, and they won't enjoy being around us, and arguing can become a bad habit. Then people will think we're unkind and selfish, and then we lose our good friends. So it's better to be peaceful and friendly. And we should try to remember when we find ourselves in an unpleasant argument that winning the argument is not as important as how we're going to feel later on. It may often cause more harm than good. So what can we do to stop an unpleasant argument? What if you say to the other person, "Don't shout," or "Why are you yelling at me?" or "Why are you so angry?" You think that's a good way to stop an argument? Actually, no, because the other person might feel that you're accusing him of being angry, and then that's kind of like putting him down, so it's usually not a good idea. Instead, you could say, "I understand what you're saying," or "I understand how you feel." So you make the other person feel respected, like you're listening to them. And if you're having a disagreement on what to do or how to do something, try to think of something else you can both agree on. Maybe give another option. For example, can we do this instead? Another way to stop an unpleasant argument is to just change the subject. Or we can say, "Okay, let's just forget it," or "Let's talk about it later." Or we might even say, "I don't want to argue," or even, "Okay, whatever." We could say, "I respect your opinion, but I have a different opinion," or "Let's just agree to disagree." If the other person is arguing in a loud voice, just keep your own voice quiet, or you could just listen until the person calms down. If it's getting really unpleasant, then we can just turn away or walk away. You could also try being like a powerful and silent lion. Stand tall and look at the person directly, and just gaze at them, saying nothing. And then turn away like you don't have time to argue. That way you don't seem like you're being weak or admitting that you're wrong. If we're accused of doing something wrong, and we in fact did something wrong, then instead of arguing and trying to defend ourselves, just say "I'm sorry," or admit that what you did was wrong. Then the other person can't argue anymore, and it's maybe more likely to forgive us, or at least they'll stop arguing. And if we really didn't do anything wrong, then just calmly explain why you didn't do wrong. Or if it's not easy to prove, then, for example, if somebody says you're a liar and it's not easy to prove you didn't lie, then you can just say, "That's your opinion." And that implies you don't agree, but it doesn't encourage an argument. Also, to try to stop an argument from getting unpleasant, you could try to distract someone's thoughts with offering something to drink, or offering something to eat, or offering to help them in some way. Can you think of any other ways to stop an argument? In some situations, we can do what the lion and tiger did and ask someone else for advice. So next time you feel you're getting into an unpleasant argument, watch out that you don't make faces and get loud like the lion and the tiger, but instead think about how you can stop the argument and keep everybody peaceful. So that's all for now. Let's wish that all beings be happy and peaceful.